Welcome to Technology Tangents. We get leaders together to discuss the important tech of today and the implications for tomorrow. Our discussions are fun, lighthearted, and frankly opinionated, but hopefully gives you a sense of what matters, what to pay attention to, and what to ignore. Hello, Jason. How are you this evening?
I'm good. So I walked into my office this morning and I'm like, who brought their 11-year-old kid to work today? It was Vincent.
Turns out I brought myself to work. Yeah, that's exactly
the
right.
The no beard is.
You're just jealous that I could be, legitimately carded when I order alcoholic drinks now. And
no, I'm jealous that you can grow that beard because I can't. I can't grow one.
And Kevin, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Yeah,
I like the non-beard look,
appreciate it. Yeah, it's a little cooler at least.
So we'll take that.
The best thing, I asked him what his wife said, and he's like, she didn't say anything. I'm like, ooh, that's really bad. Silence is worse than anything.
Well, he's on 48 hours of growth, so we're on the comeback trail.
Yeah, I'm quickly trying to recoup my losses here, if you will.
Yeah,
I feel like I could even tell a difference from this morning. Like it would take me a month to grow that much.
It's a little slow, but not as slow as you, apparently. Interesting. So today I want to talk about the economy and really what that plays out for macroeconomic trends, especially with technology. I think that, as we just saw from the Fed, they just had their meeting, of course, and it was the first time that it might look like they could start cutting rates. They've left it exactly unchanged at the 23-year high of 5.3%. Despite all the economists saying something different, especially by political breakdown, you can kind of see that playing out here. But Powell said, if inflation continues to fall, then a reduction in rate is definitely on the table. And that, of course, next meeting is September 17th, 18th, so that could be as soon as then. And he went on later to say something to the effect of, we're getting closer to the point at which reduction rates would be on the table then, but we're not quite there yet. The interesting thing from my standpoint, we've said before, we would expect rates to be higher for a lot longer than people would enjoy. That's sort of the necessary nature of pulling as much money as we've dumped into the economy back out of it. But what's surprising, and if you are a listener to this podcast, you'll know that I made a prediction, at least, this sort of happened much sooner. And it hasn't. And so then there's this question of is this really going to be sort of a pullback or not? Is this just sort of the soft landing? It feels a little bumpy, but it's actually going to be quite soft. And so I spent some time looking into this a bit more, and I want to talk about that with you guys. But if you look at 2024 in particular, there's been a huge infusion of capital from two places specifically. So one, Jason, you'll be excited, my favorite, AI. We know that all of the major tech players are spending an enormous amount of money, right? Sundar, the CEO of Google, Alphabet, said when you're going through a curve like this, there's a much greater risk of underinvesting than overinvesting. So he's going to keep dumping money into this. CapEx second quarter was driven overwhelmingly by the investment in AI. This is buying new data centers, buying new chips for those servers. All of these things have actually higher requirements for typical server farms because of the consumption of electricity and therefore the cooling associated with it. So these server farms are even more expensive than traditional server farms. Microsoft, Satya Nadella, said something similar, which is during the cloud transition, it was this sense of both a knowledge-intensive and capital-intensive transition, and he expects this to be exactly the same. And in fact, cloud and AI-related spend represents nearly all total capital expenditures, with roughly half of it for the infrastructure needs. And that will support monetization over the next 15 years and beyond. Meta, again, I can keep it on this list, Meta, Amazon, et cetera, every CEO on these earnings calls is saying something similar. And collectively, they've spent north of $1.4 trillion on this stuff. So it's a huge boon to the sort of GDP of this country. And we've seen it play out with earnings for places like NVIDIA. Surprise, surprise, like stock through.
And also NVIDIA.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and so they are spending an enormous amount of money, billions of dollars every quarter, hundreds of billions of dollars every quarter. And, the question is that real? Of course it's real. Those are real dollars. That's real stuff being produced. It's going to be in a server farm somewhere. But in terms of economic growth, is that real? Or is that just a temporary blip that's sort of making this, what will be a very hard landing, feel a bit softer initially And once they stop spending on these one time or once in a decade, as Satya put it, 15 years, decade and a half, that dries up, and they look to then monetize those investments, and we'll see if they do or they don't. They may not, who knows? But like, then there's gonna be a much, much harder landing. So I'll pause there. I have some more thoughts on that, but any reaction to that or a different setup if you prefer?
Well, my thought, first of all, is this is a Kevin Erickson topic, but no, I mean, I think if you start backwards from the monetization, I think, there's been a lot of talk around like, hey, is all this AI investment in AI and GPUs and data center build out going to, be a positive ROI? Well, I think of this a lot like the cloud, right? If you go back to 2008, people were like, well, Amazon spending, all of this fortune on building out cloud data centers and building, essentially the software to drive them, right? Which was not insignificant. It was billions of dollars, and they had something like a total cloud spend in 2008 of like $5 billion. And I'm sure people then were like, this is just a big way. What does this have to do with selling books? Was the famous quote that, Bezos said he got asked every day that year. And well, if you fast forward now, it's 2024. Cloud spend this year, $563 billion. Mm-hmm. Estimated to be $1 trillion by 2026 by Gartner and others. So, or close to $1 trillion. So, I think this is a heavy upfront investment, very analogous to cloud, that people are going to be using these AI capabilities and need those that infrastructure for the next what's it been 20 years. 20 more. I'm sure though, my belief is that I'm sure it will, have a payback. So, as these things become more widely adopted, but so that's my thought on the AI build out. And that now, is that propping up the, economy, or said better, is that, inflating the metrics, so to speak, of the economy, and things are a lot worse than they look? I think that is probably also true. And so I do think that probably like you, I thought this would, be a worse economy a lot earlier, but the other shoe does drop eventually, always. And so, I do think this is a case of a very few making it look, more rosy than it is. Now, what does that mean for companies, especially, for our company, for our clients? That's a different question, but I'll defer to the more classically trained economist to give his opinion.
Give you my opinion. I'm not so certain about classically trained. I'm going to maybe take a slightly different tact. I mean, we went down the monetization and the investment. If we take even maybe one step further back, what I think has been intriguing is that and I'll use this statement, and it goes back to, Q4 of really almost 18 months ago. Altman saw kind of this whole concept of like AI is going to allow us all to eat bonbons and work 20 hours a week. And I think, to me, what we've seen a little bit is that the realization that it's going to take longer for us to have the benefits of AI. And how much that was driven in the technology companies that were making and building these things, the ones that we just described. That definitely, they spiked. I mean, we've really benefited from an overall economy perspective. Market surely has benefited from those investments and people's expectations for that. Yeah, I'm curious though, every company has assumed that AI was going to change their experience, and I think we saw a huge lift of that. And I think now it's going to take a little bit longer. And I don't remember close enough to what happened with cloud, Jason, in that sense, but my sense is a little bit similar. People probably didn't quite understand the cloud as much for how much it would change, but it did take a little bit for that to start to really permeate through. I mean,
it was a decade.
Yeah, and you also right in the middle of that, you had much lower interest rates, so those investments were being made were less costly. So I think the question where my head right now is, and this is where it gets fun for me, is we'll keep it. The bit of that AI piece is interesting. How do you analyze if you had a lot of micro hype that brought it up and now it's back to reality? Well, what is the average company, and how do you think through that? How do you reinvest your return on investment if there was a bit of, as we've long discussed in this forum, around this I just got the hungry hippo effect of AI for the last year, where you just had to do it. Well, now if it starts to come a bit more into classically, what's the expected return? I think that's actually helpful. So I think I would also put myself in the camp of the market. I think AI without the last 18 months or really maybe 15 months of that, I think that we would have been in this spot sooner. I think but then I think there's the other broader elements that are kind of understanding. So again, what is the expected ROI? How much is it going to change society? Increased workforce. What does that look like? And how does that play out? Where does that fit within the different policies in the U.S.? You still have a lot of political uncertainty with all the elections, what that's going to look like, different perspectives based on your persuasion. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit. We have a whole new round of Middle East, same struggles, different day, different things that are going on. And then, maybe a little bit different, that I think there's a big question right now around manufacturing and tariffs in the U.S., which is a different element, very different political element. So I think you've got a lot of different factors that are all coming to play. I think a lot of uncertainty around the Democratic presidential candidate, which has been cleared up. And so now the kind of the reality of where we're setting in, what that looks like. And so now people expected to drop. Now we're here. So that's my tee up. I don't know if there's the conclusions and Vincent, how we want to go through that, but I think it's fascinating to see how much of a run up of the economy you've had really over the last 6 months. Yep. That was almost exclusively based on this idea that, everything's going to become easier with AI, right. and we're going to print money on that. And I think, that's not there as much anymore. So it doesn't change in my mind the hype and what we're going to do, but now we can actually make better, I think, risk invested decisions, which I love. So.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And I think there is this interesting question of, what we've learned over the past, call it 6, 12 months, whatever that happens to be. Is AI ultimately going to be inflationary or deflationary? And we're seeing a lot of evidence that actually might be more deflationary than we would have expected. It's really not that expensive to actually get great value. If you choose the right things, you go after those opportunities. We've seen time and time again that it could be ultimately very deflationary for the economy, broadly speaking. Now, maybe we'll start inventing a bunch of new things and we can sort of make up that delta. But if the sort of overall set of goods that we produce stays static, which again, I don't think it will, but if it does, I think it ultimately is a pretty deflationary thing. And the question is, how quickly can we then go invent new things as a result of all of this sort of efficiency that we're getting? That's going to be the real hard question that will ultimately determine how long is it deflationary versus ultimately being potentially additive and accretive to the economy. And I think that comes down to what we're seeing so far is really this, you brought it up earlier, we're seeing this sort of huge chasm between the haves and have-nots. Whether that be at a consumer level, where you have people in a certain class of jobs that are actually doing quite well, they're getting good raises, they're getting good bonuses still, and then you have a different class that are really struggling just to buy food these days. And again, if we just think about what's really happening in an inflationary period, we've dumped a bunch of money into the economy. And so that meant that everybody has more conceptually money, but they all want the same number of goods. So the prices of goods has to go up because we can't massively increase supply rapidly. And so what you have to do is ultimately get back to that place where either you make people poorer conceptually, whether that be because prices are increased or there's just a decreased desire to buy things. Either way, you have to find that new equilibrium or it will find one for you. And so that's where we are. There's a huge amount of money dumped in the economy, and it's just going to take time to work that out. If you're a company and you take that same lens, though, look, if you have a low debt, high margin business, you're probably doing great. Like the high interest rates haven't really affected you. Your cost of doing business hasn't really increased dramatically as a result. Your competitors, it has. Your margins are high, so even if it was a little bit erosive, you can probably have some amount of pricing power, allow you to decrease prices a little, but really just decrease customer base, worst case scenario if you had to. And then lastly, most of the economy, GDP in the US, is actually consumer spend. We know that. And this is where it comes to the second point about unemployment. Consumers got a lot of money through lots of different programs during the COVID era, and savings was really high. People weren't traveling. They weren't spending as much. All these things were happening simultaneously. Savings were really good. We're now at a point where savings have been eroded. Debt has increased dramatically in a high interest rate environment, meaning that at some point, those consumers are going to have to start servicing that debt in a meaningful way, and therefore their capacity to spend ultimately changes. I think when you overlay the fact that we're in the middle of an election this year in the US, that becomes a really interesting market that's going to be incredibly hard to predict. And therefore, my guess is most businesses end up in this sort of stuck mode, this sort of lame duck for the rest of this year where there's just malaise. They don't really want to make strong investments because they don't know which way the economy is going to go. There's a great chart we'll try and put in the show notes here where it shows how people, just the average citizen in this country, view the economic state as a function of their political party and who's in office and where it is in that term. And what you see naturally is when Democrats are in office, typically Democrats think the economy is better than Republicans view. The exception being Clinton, where both parties thought actually the economy was in really good shape. Of course, that was the run up to the 2000 .com ultimate bust, but that wasn't really under his term. That was later. And so you see this massive divide between these two. And I think we're seeing it right now, again, back to the point, where Republicans in particular have a much more pessimistic view than Democrats do. And we'll have to see how that ultimately plays out. But my guess is for the rest of this year, either way, there's just going to be a risk aversion for companies buying anything. They're going to want to delay, defer, et cetera. And as we're getting to this point with AI hype cycle sort of cooling down, if you will, and I don't think it's really a hype. It's definitely a hype cycle. I think there is real value there, to be clear. I don't think it's a hype cycle like this was just garbage. But I do think that there will be less just free-flowing money. They're going to have to be tied back to return on investments, and therefore there will be less spend on it more broadly, which I think is healthy. Broadly speaking, that's very healthy. I do think that spend will decrease. So now, all the way back to the point I was making, which is around consumers' unemployment, right? So consumers make up the majority of spend, GDP in this country. As unemployment increases with already depleted consumer savings and increased debt, they can't spend as much. Now, if they lose their job, you really get into a world of hurt. And that takes quarters to build up over time. It's not typically... if you have a housing crisis, for example, and a bunch of people are displaced at the same time, different story. But in general, it takes a couple of quarters for things to build up. But all the ingredients are right there. And inflation, just this year has increased something like 20% above where it was at the beginning of the year. So inflation is actually getting quite high again. What's even more interesting is if you look one layer deeper, almost all of, actually I'll do it from this angle first. Government spending, let's back up even further. GDP at the moment is not recessionary. So nominally recession is when GDP shrinks. GDP, again, who knows what the exact number is because it's always trailing, but the estimates they released in this earnings call were at 2%. So generously 2% growth for the last quarter. Okay, seems positive. Government spending is 6%. That's frankly, unprecedented prior to COVID. At least that's a huge number. That's an unsustainable number. 6% of every dollar this country makes across the whole is being spent by the federal government. So if you were just to, let's say, balance the budget, you remove that 6%, because again, we're way overspending what we actually make in GDP, we'd be at a nominal negative 4% growth for private sector. What's even more interesting is that over the past year, more than 100% of all job growth is directly attributable to the federal government spending. And what I mean by that is the federal government has created more jobs than have been removed from the private sector. And all of the growth has actually been from the government then. So as private sector actually has been decreasing in job opportunities, the government's been increasing faster than the private sector's been decreasing. And now, according to this report, which we can link here, so again, take it with a grain of salt, but what they say, now 30% of all employment in the U.S. is either directly or indirectly attributable to the government. And when I say indirect, I mean is being paid for through subsidies or some form of rebates. So my point here is, it seems to me the economy actually hasn't been performing great, but has been heavily subsidized by tech making huge investments, like once in a couple decade kind of investments.
And tech making one type of investment. Right?
That's right. That is exactly one type of huge investment. That's right. The infrastructure for these. And government spending at incredible rates that we haven't really seen before. And my question is, are either of those two things sustainable past this sort of election cycle, if you will? Meaning, like, what will really happen in this space, and how does a company prepare for whatever might happen in that context?
I'd add a third maybe we're a little bit long in the tooth in this, but I also think it's still close enough to coming off of COVID. So and so all the investment and spending that came off that, both from tech and from government to this, to that. And that's where, in my unskilled, uneducated view, I actually think the market's taken a little bit of a beating because of some of these themes. Like, it's really more of like the perception of like, we can't maintain, that spending, in my perspective, regardless of political affiliation. At some point, the public sector's got to, the private sector has to increase. And we know what it's like when the public sector spends like this. There's plenty of countries around the world that can give us an evidence of what that looks like in terms of growth. And so I think that's where I think part of having the switch in candidates probably is swinging people's perspective. So you have tech that's potentially, the cost of capital is becoming more expensive. The time frame for return is less certain. And are we going to maintain spending at this level? And are we all of a sudden going to have more people? So then this boom, now we start to see some of the market unraveling. That I think we predicted. Recessions were being predicted all last year. They didn't happen. I think this is what we were seeing, and now you're seeing that. Doesn't mean I'm predicting a recession. Not that I obviously don't want a recession, but it is intriguing just where we're at and what that means. And then I think, you typically talk about getting into at least in the U.S., you get in an election cycle to where, no decisions get made after Labor Day. Right. It's possible that we're a little bit early into that now. Or you start to see a little bit of momentary burst for clients, and companies are going to make some final decisions right now. Then they're going to go and grab their popcorn and wait to see how the next 90 days kind of play out.
Yeah.
Well, of the three things you mentioned, I do think the continued investment in AI and AI infrastructure, the picks and shovels of AI does continue because there's too much long term there, like the cloud. But the other two, I do think, the other shoe's going to drop, and the net of that is going to be that I think it is going to be somewhat recessionary, if not very. But
even on the picks and shovels point, Elon was on stage recently at the NVIDIA conference. He's like their best customer, apparently. He spent, $100 billion or something insane in terms of their chips. Like, it's a one-time bill. Like, my point is, like, where does NVIDIA go next? Like, are you suggesting that, these...
Well, that would be like saying, like, hey, in 2008, we built all of the data centers. We don't need any more hard drives or CPUs, right? Or networking gear. It always grows.
But isn't that, I don't actually know this number off the top of my head, but I would have assumed that was sort of peak valuation for AMD and Intel at that moment, and they've sort of declined as a result since then. Is that not true in your mind? Or
I don't know, but there's obviously been a sustained build of all of those other things, right? And,
I'm not saying NVIDIA goes to zero, to be clear, right. But I'm saying this huge valuation,
level off, right?
Or even decrease a little bit.
A little bit. But my point is, like, that's not going to happen anytime soon, right? Because they're, everyone go look at Amazon, at Microsoft or Google. They're like, we're going to build a data center here and here and here. I think there's like 11, new announced, and so I don't think that's happening anytime soon, but I still think it does. It's not enough to buoy the other effects in the macroeconomy you mentioned, and so I do think there's going to be a bit of a downturn. But like I said, we've been saying that it's been these other factors, the money working its out, the spending working its way out of the system, and savings and AI. But the question is, all right, well, we're in agreement. Maybe the only disagreement is like, what are the, which of the factors and how bad does it get? But I think we were all in agreement that it probably won't be great the next 6 to 12 months. So what do we do?
Yeah, well, one more before we get to what do we do. I think it's interesting, going back to you alluded to it, Vincent, your perspective on political affiliation. And, I think that's where, I do think that a tech investment will continue to, maybe it shifts a bit from hardware and it gives a little bit more to labor. I think that will continue, but I don't know personally if I think government spending is going to change on either, whoever wins. I think
right.
So, and maybe it's different, maybe the amount of it's different, what we spend it on slightly different. So I think that's a different macro change that's for us, right? That's, as it used to be more about politics. Now it's more about different flavor of politics, which I think speaks to, more central driven, decision making, and pick your different reasons why. There's tons of them, but I don't know where does the market, how does the market react to that? How do we as society react to that? There's a lot of different things that we go there. And I just don't. It's hard to imagine that we'd stay at that. But I don't think people have context of how much we spend. They don't have the average person doesn't have the context of 6%. Like where would you find that information out? So it's going to be really intriguing about where we go. And I think these even for some of our listeners, the idea that all the government, the jobs increase has been really driven to subsidiary government, that's alarming. For other parts of our listeners, they probably don't think that's scary. And frankly, we've probably got colleagues in different parts of the world that think that that's okay too. Because, so I mean, that's just going to be really, I think that we're in a bit of a broader re-reckoning a little bit of society. So then that leads me to my question, what do you do as a company? And, shocking, what do? You care about your customers, you care about your products, you care about your investments, you care about your employees. I still think those fundamentals, I mean, at the end of the day, our current interest rates really, when we look at over 100-year time frame, are not overly expensive. I think so it's going to be really around what do we look like that. So how do you continue to work through that? I thought it was interesting that the number of people in the workforce went up, and trying to interpret what that meant, and is that being driven from, people needing jobs? Is it people from subsidies going down? So again, I didn't dig enough into it. Maybe you had a chance to look at that, Vincent, but like, it's I think again, general rule, like run a good business, and I think you're going to be able to weather the different storms. And so,
I just think it's fascinating. And to your point, the government being such a large portion of the economy in terms of employment, a large employer of the economy is definitely new. It's a policy regime change. And I think it's just worth calling out, a bit like ZIRP was. I mean, zero interest rate policy created a bunch of different business models that were viable that aren't anymore, and took some models that were more viable under high interest rate regimes and made them inviable. And so I think this is the same thing. Yeah. I think that if the government really is going to continue the spending, and to your point, it's really hard to cut back government spending in general. We've seen that across many governments. It seems to be sort of a non-decreasing function. It becomes a real thing. And I think the real risk here would be, from a policy standpoint, is if that's the direction we're headed. Back to this point, we have and have-nots. There are some industries where they aren't high profit margin. They aren't low debt. I mean, you take a farmer, for example, right? Like, they have to borrow all the money to buy the seeds, to go plant these things, to water, hopefully. And if that all goes well, then they have to borrow more to get laborers to come, and then they have to go sell it, and they'll eventually get paid and pay all that back. Yeah. Well, that's a very low margin business, and they can't just raise their prices because these are commodity prices at their core. And so that means that the government likely will be in a position where they have to get more involved in this environment, and then you just keep pushing the pendulum even farther and potentially faster.
Yeah, I'd say, or airlines, right? They have a lot of capital needs.
Yeah. Airlines is another example, especially right now with, we're down to basically one single supplier, with Boeing again getting hung up with no deliveries and having huge issues causing cascading effects across many airlines. We're getting to the point where it does feel like the government's going to take an increasingly heavy-handed approach to try and resolve that, because it is a serious problem. Mm-hmm. And similar with defense, we saw this with the two wars that are now going on across the world, and the entire industrial complex got so atrophied. You could make the argument as to why that happened. Was it too few vendors? Was it too few suppliers? Too much consolidation? The procurement process for government being too rigorous, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But regardless of how it happened, we got there. As we needed those resources, there wasn't a lot to be done. And so the risk is the more you do that, the more consolidation that inevitably happens because of all the regulatory issues that you have to then overcome that are expensive and slow and difficult to do. It just changes the economic policy and therefore changes business strategy from my standpoint. Yeah,
one more, just this is for kicks and giggles. You think about, this is where you throw in personal perspectives on what does it mean, really equity. I think that's the other element of that. So I mean, that typically will that lead to more propped up? Would that be a regulation of how that happens? Keeping people in certain statuses, right? So that leads to more government spending, in my opinion. But then I think it's very intriguing, Jason, going back to your perspective around all the data centers, you also in elements of real significant environmental policy change, which at the end of the day, there's got to be power to keep the data center going, right? So I mean, some of these things that, we're also, I feel like in both of those extremes, we're in a little bit of if I say it enough, it'll just happen moment in our society, which at some point you actually have to make it happen. So I don't know where that ends, but I do think we're a little bit of that. And frankly, I think AI has been a little bit of that. If we just keep on saying AI is going to change the world enough, it will. If we keep on saying that everyone's going to be equal, it will. If we can just make everything renewable, I'll still have power in my AI machine. It will still work. I think we're now running into some of these things where, where do you start to, how do you work through that? I mean, the whole concept of risk management, and again, going back into that as a business discipline, I think it is going to be more in vogue again. And I think that one thing that I hope, and this is more, I guess, my own personal editorial, is I'd like to think that companies and individuals take personal responsibility. I don't know. I mean, again, going back, I alluded to tariffs before, right? I mean, that's an interesting one. I mean, that's a very complex thing. That's more, what we hear about it in my mind is very simplistic. It's either a global economy or it's not. And I mean, that's a very simplistic view. But I think it's goes back to, are we going to arbitrarily make things more difficult for certain people, and we're going to pick and choose? I mean, I think that's going to be hard for companies to continue. How do you make sure you're in the favored state? Mm-hmm. And I think it's one more. I feel like we're just pointing out the obvious things tonight, but it's just more of the intriguing element of like that. If you had one more California company leave this week, again, even that reality of like, people are making choices, and you can see what they're doing, and they're voting with their feet, they're moving with their feet. That doesn't change the macro story so much, but like, what one point when can't you move to a different state, or you can't afford the next neighborhood, or you don't have and I think that's where we're getting closer to that moment, and I think that if that causes some pain, I think that's actually ultimately going to be a good thing. But then going back to, again, now where you were trying to probably take us back to your companies, I mean, I think you have to be able to assess that, and you need to work through that. I think you have to continue to invest. I think that some of the themes that we've talked about before around workforce, everything from how you skill, how you train, to age of workforce, where people have to work longer. I think we've, again, it's the greatest hits of the pod, but like it's the difference of different generational views on what labor looks like. And so you have all these different themes of how you have to work through that. And again, my simplistic view is the way you get through that is by simply continuing to, really focus on what you're doing, what you're delivering, how you care. I think you're going to find people. It's a lot easier to actually, I think, attract talent today than it was obviously a few years ago. And I think that will continue. I think you're going to see companies will continue to sort through individuals that want to be part of creating things. And I do believe in the American capitalism view of like creation and insight, regardless of political affiliation, what that looks like. And I hope that that's what comes out of this, and that then will spur the next bit of growth. But something that's going to be kind of interesting. And I think it will be fueled by AI innovation and tech innovation. Then we're going to have to figure out society. Last thing on my soapbox is just, the have and the have-nots, right? You can't have this labor core or this knowledge-based core that's using technology-driven themes to have a certain lifestyle in life, and then you've got everyone who takes care of everyone else. I mean, again, society has pretty many examples over the thousands of years. It's how that one plays out for you. Right. And so it'll be interesting how we take that back into our next stage here. So,
yeah, no, it totally makes sense. Were you going to say something, Jason? Go ahead.
No.
I was going to say, it totally makes sense to me, and I agree. I think, look, this is again, it was probably a year ago we had this podcast where we were talking about the recession sort of moment. I'm going to say the same thing I said then, which is like, this is the moment that you really need to retrench. You need to figure out like what really differentiates you as a business. Cull the bets that are just, they're flyers. Like, you just got to get rid of those things. I think as a CEO, you have to really figure out what's going to differentiate us in this market. And then how am I going to lead into AI in a very productive way? This is not AI for the sake of your shareholders. This is not AI for the sake of analyst calls. This is like legitimately we're using AI to differentiate how we deliver that good, that service, that core value that we bring to our customers. And I think that those two things are the most important. I think as a business leader, if you will, if you take it from the business standpoint, not the CEO, you better get your budget right now. And you better get lean quickly, or at least have a plan to get lean quickly. I think those are going to be big deals right now. Look, I don't think you're going to see a lot more borrowing going on right now. You're going to have to wait and see what happens with the Fed. They almost certainly, the betting markets, if you want to trust those, do suggest it's about 100% almost say the Fed is going to cut something in that September meeting. The question is how much? Is it 25 or 50 pips? Like, we'll see. Either way, it's not going to make a big difference. But that then lays the groundwork for maybe more cuts coming up. And that's where I say maybe you can get some more money from capital markets elsewhere. But right now, I think you're going to make the rest of the year without any new capital, without any money. So to the extent that you're a savvy business leader and you need something, go get it now, because I think in 2 months even, that well will be entirely dry and nothing more will be coming for a while. So do that. Deploy it wisely with AI. I really do believe still, even to this day, the businesses that survive will have adopted AI in a very savvy, meaningful way. Is it deflationary or not? Again, we'll see how that plays out, but either way, it's going to be critical, I think, to the resulting businesses that can survive. So this is your last chance, if you will, last breath before the next wave comes, and use it wisely. That'd be my advice.
I agree with that. I'd expand it a little bit and say, and technology and data, right? There's not just AI, but, there's so much waste I see in people's use of technology and the processes and things that they do, like really streamlining that and being able to deliver efficiently and effectively, I think is important. And I'd also say on the AI topic specifically, getting real value and driving real business value out of AI does not mean getting everybody a license to Chat GPT, right? Like, okay, that's great. But it's a meaningful integration into using these technologies in your business process in different parts of different components of the business to actually make real decisions, not let me write an email with it.
Yeah.
And that's a much different problem, right? It's engineering focused, it's security and data cleanliness focused. It's a much bigger problem than rolling out an end user tool for people to play with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great call out, which is when we say AI, look, you might need some data scientists, you might need some large language model, you might need, and again, it might not even be generative AI, frankly, like classical AI, if you want to call it that, or classical machine learning actually still creates incredible value. There's no doubt about that. But even then, if we're being honest, the majority of the work that most companies have to go do is that foundational work, that data readiness work, that integration work, that user experience, that change management. That's where actually most of the work is these days. And I think that, to your point, people often overlook that, and it's critical that you contemplate those things or it won't work. You're going to get stuck in POC purgatory where everything looks great in a slide deck, and yet for some reason we can't get this thing rolled out. I don't know why it's so hard. Well, it's because you didn't contemplate all these other points. And that's where you really have to, that's where you're going to get the value. I mean, to your point, you could roll out Enterprise ChatGPT, Copilot, fine. I mean, they're not bad tools. Intrinsically, they're not bad tools. They're good tools. But asking somebody to swivel a chair between that tool and their business process and then reinvent their job for themselves is not a winning recipe, at least not usually. So it's a good call. Any other thoughts from you guys, or?
Last thing I'll say is that fortune favors the bold. And I think that's an interesting moment. Who's going to be willing to still invest? Who's going to be willing to take that? Where things are going to emerge? I do think that we can pick all our silly statements, around dark and dawn and all those different elements. But I think there's some truth to that. And I don't think we're there yet. But I do think that having the wisdom to know where to invest and how to do that and to continue to work through that. I think we've talked before too, but I think there may be maybe easier and more nimble for smaller companies to kind of step into some voids, lower cost of overhead, how they play through that. But I think how you continually grow and improve and seek opportunity is going to help you win. So
it's good. Jason?
My final thought is, even when we decided we were going to talk about the economy, he brings it around to
Hey, you started
every time.
Yeah. Every time. I'm very good at this.
Did you know that he uses with his barber, they did images on AI to see what he looked like without his beard.
Without a beard. That model might
different ones.
Yeah, exactly. My face actually, it's funny. My phone doesn't really recognize my face anymore. I had to redo it.
That's funny.
It's really.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not kidding.
Because it's usually the super orbital, things that it looks at.
Yeah, I think that might be the old school way. I don't know how modern facial recognition actually works from that standpoint on the iPhone anyway. I don't know. Anyway, I think it's great. I mean, this is really good. The other thing I will say, here's a pro tip. Look, we said these companies are spending huge amounts of money. So if you're doing any AI project and you're getting some help from consultants like us or whomever, you better be asking for an investment from those cloud providers because they have big war chests right now. And so don't pay full price if you don't have to. Get some subsidies going on. So that's my pro tip for you who made it to the end of the podcast. There's some free money to be had. Significant, by the way. Significant money. So anyway, that's it.
That's a good idea. We should add pro tip to the end so that people actually
have to listen
to the whole thing.
New format.
Or just somewhere in the back
random
third.
Yeah, exactly. I wrote a test or two where for middle schoolers or whatever, where I do that kind of thing, where in the middle of some long story prompt, whatever, like, hey, if you see this question, whatever. Anyway, we'll see if it works for podcasts. We'll see. Well, anyway, thank you guys for joining me today. I appreciate it. For those that would like to learn more, please visit the insights page at Credera.com. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again. Bye-bye.